Good morning. Thank you for joining us for a training on updates to equitable services to non-public schools. Please ensure that your microphones are muted and be aware that this training is being recorded. I'm Chantel Carter, the non-public ombudsman as authorized under ESSA. I have with me today Lisa Huckins, an education program specialist. We both work in the Office of Federal Programs. Our office programmatically handles questions regarding equitable services in Title I, 2A, 3, 4A, and now the Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, or ESSER, and Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or Eans. The Office for Exceptional Children handles non-public equitable service questions related to IDEA, and area fiscal coordinators handle non-public state funding questions related to administrative cost reimbursement and auxiliary services. If you have questions regarding auxiliary services or IDEA, you will need to address those with the appropriate office. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Lisa.
Thanks, Chantel. Good morning, everyone. Today's training will include a discussion of the non-public data system, or NPDS, what should be included during consultation, how should services be provided, what options a district has in the provision of equitable services, and what documentation will be necessary for compliance purposes. We'll finish the training with the questions that are submitted in the chat box. The latest Npds Enhancement addresses the requirement for non-public schools that receive services funded with federal grants to be identified as a nonprofit school. Before non-public principals can opt into federal programs on the Program Selection tab, they must answer the question, is your school nonprofit? By selecting yes to that question, they'll receive a drop-down list of all the available federal programs. It's an important reminder that non-public schools should only opt into the programs for which they want to participate. Their selection here will drive the way that data will be entered. If they opt into Title I, low-income data reported to public buildings will be required. Conversely, if the non-public school only opts into Title IIA and 4A, no student-level data will be required. After the year that we've had with CARES Act funding and ESSER, it may be advantageous for non-public schools to report all low-income children, as it's impossible to know when and how that data may be used. There is a help link in the event the non-public school is unsure of how to prove nonprofit status. This definition is found in the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, or EDGAR. Because the public district is ultimately responsible for ensuring compliance to the law, districts may request evidence that the non-public school has nonprofit status. In addition to the self-reporting of nonprofit status by non-public schools, Question 1 on the consultation guide will require the district to identify that the school is nonprofit. This is meant to ensure this topic is discussed as part of the ongoing, timely, and meaningful consultation between the district and the non-public school. The non-public data system opened March 5th and will remain open for reporting until May 7th. CCIP note number 467 was released on March 5th, and it included updated instructions and additional non-public equitable services guidance on district Title I calculations and our carryover policy. The CCIP note also describes an adjustment to the calculation for equitable services in Title IIA and 4A. When the FY22 CCIP funding application is available in June 2021, the calculation currently only includes in-state non-public student counts. The adjustment to the calculation will include all children reported by the non-public school regardless of where they reside. Our systems are built so that non-public principals report October 2020 low-income data in NPDS during the spring of 2021, and that drives the FY22 CCIP application when it opens in June. We know that some non-public schools didn't collect low-income forms in the 2021 school year because many were receiving free meals for all of their students. There's an allowability in the Title I guidance to collect data for non-public equitable services every 2 years. What that means for us this year is that in consultation and agreement with your non-public schools, they could use October 2019 or October 2020 counts. District counts preloaded in the FY22 consolidated application will be from October 2019. In Ohio, we're fortunate to have sophisticated systems that interface with one another to calculate and display equitable service amounts for districts. Districts are not tasked with doing those calculations themselves. These systems, though, are only as good as the data that we have. It's absolutely essential that public districts verify the data that's entered into NPDS before marking the participation form public approved. Public approved status means that the district's verified and agrees with the data that's been entered. The system also tracks which person at the district approves the data. In order to mark the form public approved, the district should ensure that the addresses of the children fall within the public building attendance area where they are reported. Many districts in Ohio do not serve all their buildings. A child reported to the wrong public building may create an erroneous equitable service amount. There's a chance the child may not even be residing in your district. You won't know that if you don't check the addresses. You must also have a discussion during consultation about how low-income status has been determined. There should be forms to back up these counts. During a compliance visit, we'll ask the districts to explain their verification process. The number of English learners should also be verified. The public district has the responsibility to identify English learners, so you should already know what that count will be even before it's reported in NPDS. The same would be true for the number of eligible children with disabilities. The electronic consultation guide is found on the Consultation tab of NPDS. Districts have the requirement to start this process. During the period when NPDS is open, from March to May 7, all consultation guides should be started. There are questions that ask about how low-income status will be determined and the needs of the non-public school. These are conversations that should begin now in timely, meaningful, and ongoing consultation to prepare for services in the 21-22 school year. Consultation guides should be marked completed by the public district at the time the CCIP application is submitted on July 1. It's a requirement in the law that equitable services to non-public schools begin with no delays. Contracts or memorandums of understanding for services from another district should be completed over the summer. The non-public principal must sign off on the consultation guide after it's been completed by the district. We would expect that to occur by the start of the school year in the fall. Consultation guides are editable by the district all year in the event that changes are necessary due to ongoing consultation with the non-public school. Districts are reminded that non-chartered, non-tax schools are eligible to participate in federal programs, but they don't automatically report in NPDS. Districts must reach out to non-chartered, non-tax schools that are located within their districts to determine if they want to participate. If they do want to participate, they must contact Chantel as soon as possible to get NPDS access so they can report their students. You can find the list of non-chartered, non-tax schools on the ODE website after searching those key terms. An Excel file for school year 2021 is available for download. In October of 2019, the U.S. Department of Education released updated Title I Equitable Services Guidance. If you haven't had the opportunity to read this guidance, we highly encourage you to download and read it. It's written in an easy question and answer format, and there were numerous updates over the previous guidance. It's also a good idea to provide the guidance to the non-public schools you work with. Many of the questions we receive in our office are questions that can be answered straight from the guidance. You can find the guidance in our CCIP document library. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chantel.
Thank you, Lisa. If you've been with Lisa and I over our trainings this past year, This is a slide you should be really familiar with. Consultation is the cornerstone of equitable services, and this slide comes from the U.S. Department of Education. An LEA must consult with appropriate private school officials during the design and development of the LEA's Title I program. The goal of consultation is agreement between the LEA and appropriate private school officials on how the district will provide equitable services and effective programs for eligible private school children. There are many areas that should be discussed during consultation. In March, the Nonpublic data system opened for nonpublic schools to enter their federal participation data. During this time, districts should contact all of their local nonpublic schools to discuss possible participation in federal programs for the next year. As Lisa pointed out, some of those nonpublic schools are non-chartered, non-tax schools, which may not be included in NPDS. By the time the NPDS closes in May, districts should have reviewed the nonpublic low-income and residence data. During this time, districts should also be evaluating the impact of their current programs and reviewing spending to make sure funds from the current year have fully been expended. If extenuating circumstances have caused the district to not spend the full amount, they'll need to consult with a nonpublic school to plan any funds that may need to be carried over. Once districts receive their allocations in June, they should contact the participating nonpublic schools and let them know the amount of equitable services that will be available for them in the next year. Knowing those dollar amounts will allow for a more detailed discussion of what services will be provided and should allow the district to complete the consultation with a solid plan for the next school year. As the school year progresses, consultation should involve regular check-ins between the district and their nonpublic schools to ensure that planned services are being provided and tracked, parent engagement activities are happening, funds are expended as planned, and changes to the plan are made if necessary. Regardless of your delivery method, if you have an equitable service obligation, you must maintain documentation of service for compliance purposes. During a compliance review, we will look for these items: multi-criterion forms for each grade level served, rank order lists, sample school parent compacts, evidence of parent engagement, and teacher schedules or service lists. Many of these items should be available within the first month of school. Our office has started on our virtual on-site reviews and desk reviews. Lisa and I will be participating on teams whose LEAs have equitable services obligations. All services in the nonpublic schools must be secular and non-ideological. Federal funds may not provide religious activities. The public district must maintain control of funds, and federal funds may not permanently improve nonpublic schools. The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER, was awarded to districts at the beginning of last summer. Equitable services are required. The calculation is based on the proportion of low-income children reported to Title I served attendance areas enrolled in the nonpublic schools over the total number of low-income children. ESSER services must be offered to all schools with low-income children, nonpublic schools that are both in and out of the district, regardless of participation in Title I. The calculation template from CCIP Note 448 must be uploaded to the district's ESSER application in CCIP. If you are a district that has not revised your ESSER application since September, it is highly encouraged that you do a revision to ensure that the equitable services under ESSER are being calculated correctly. In general, the U.S. Department of Education has asked that LEAs consider proposed ESSER uses of funds throughout the following 5 questions. Will the proposed use of funds prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? Is it an allowable use of fund under CARES or CURSA? Is it reasonable and necessary? Does it promote equity? Does it support returning students to the classroom? The LEA should consider if the proposed use of funds meets these criteria. All activities must also fall into an ESSER allowable activity category. If you're unclear about a proposed use of funds, feel free to reach out to your consultant that is assigned to your district in the Office of Federal Programs, or if it's specific to a non-public school, feel free to reach out to myself. ESSER 2 has no equitable service obligation. Non-public schools may participate in the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or Eans program. CCIP Note 463 described the process for the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools program. The application period closes tonight at 11:59. You are all probably aware that another economic stimulus package recently passed. The American Recovery Plan Act will bring more funds for schools through ESSER 3. Equitable services will be delivered through the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, or Eans 2 program. As I mentioned at the beginning of this program, the Office for Exceptional Children handles non-public equitable services questions related to IDEA. So here you can see Mark Linsky's contact information if you do have IDEA related questions. And the last slide is our contact information for auxiliary services fiscal coordinators. They handle state funding questions, and you can find the list that's broken down by the counties they serve by searching those keywords on the ODE website. And I think with that, we're ready to answer any questions that are in the chat.
Hey, Chantel, we did have a question. I actually answered it in the chat, but if you want to do it out loud in case there's anyone calling in, the question was, do the non-public have to do the Eans on their own, or does the LEA have to help them or submit it for them?
Perfect. So the Eans program is a program that is administered from the states to the non-public schools. So the non-public schools were sent a unique link to a web-based application. They completed that themselves. Their services will flow through educational service centers. So the LEAs are not required to have any part of services under the Eans program. However, we think that educational service centers may be looking for service providers depending on what kind of services non-public schools are requesting. So you could have a request from an educational service center to provide some services at a non-public school, but that's not a requirement and that's not built into the program itself.
Edward had another question on, do we have estimates on ESSER 3 amounts? And with ESSER 3, do they have non-public requirements for the LEA under that?
Perfect. So the ESSER 3, the newest round of stimulus that was passed a couple weeks ago, does not have equitable services under it. There will be additional funds for non-public school through Eans 2.0, so another round of Eans that we were just talking about. I don't think we have estimates for ESSER 3 yet. I know that Morgan is on the call. Morgan, if you have anything to add about estimated amounts for ESSER 3. Maybe he's not here yet. I don't think we have those.
And then non-public requirements for ESSER 3, are there any?
Not with the LEA. It will be similar to the Eans program.
Yes.
Okay. And then Jennifer asks, is the LEA responsible for hiring the staff for any federal program service being provided, or is the non-public tasked with this process?
Jen, can you type in the chat box or just say, are you talking about regular 1, 2, and 4, or are you talking about Eans? I can tell you that for Title I, II, III, and IV, those programs should be, the LEA is responsible for contracting for services. So there should never be an instance where a non-public school contracts with an ESC for their title teacher. I'm not going to speak to IDEA because that's not our programmatic area. But for Title I, we would expect an LEA to engage in consultation with a non-public school, and then the LEA is responsible for either contracting with a staff person or contracting with a third-party provider or another district to provide service on their behalf. Think about title programs as an extension of the district's program. It's really the district's Title I program that's being administered at a different location, which just happens to be a non-public school. Now, since you asked the question, I am going to go ahead and say for Eans, we know the service provider is going to be ESCs. So districts will be, or non-public schools will be working with ESCs on the applications that they've submitted. And if they have service providers in mind, they should share those in that consultation process. And again, any contract for those services will be through the ESC and the contract provider, not the non-public school.
I think that's what Charlotte just asked also, so I guess you just covered that one. And Jennifer was looking for the title in IDEA.
The basic general rule is non-public schools are not the recipients of funds, so they don't have the authority to enter into contracts. Contracts has to come from the public entity that's maintaining or controlling those funds. For Title I, II, III, and IDEA, that's the districts. For Eans, that would be the ESC.
Okay, another question. Looking at the non-chartered non-tax list, and a school that is in our district boundaries is listed incorrectly with another district, do I need to contact someone?
So I would say shoot me an email. Our office does not create that list. I can definitely share it with the Office of Non-Public Education Options, who is the office that certifies the schools that are on the list as well as publishes the list. If the non-chartered non-tax school is located in your boundaries, just make sure that you are doing your due diligence in consulting with them to see if they want to participate in federal programs.
Awesome. Chantel, I went ahead and put your email address into the chat so that if anyone does need to email you with questions or information, it's there. Jennifer asked if you can cover pooling across LEAs with this group. I know more are looking into it. It is becoming very popular.
It is becoming very popular, and just in the last 2 weeks, I've had trainings with 2 separate ESCs in different areas of the state to talk about pooling across LEAs. So essentially, when a non-public school generates Title I funding, the district that generates that funding is responsible for services. Now, sometimes the non-public school is located within their boundaries, and sometimes the non-public school is located outside of their boundaries. So Title I service follows the child. What can happen is a district can generate pretty small amounts of funding for non-public schools that are located outside of their boundaries. And they have to struggle to consult with that non-public school to determine how to put services for maybe $500 in place for a student. And a lot of times we found in instances like this, it just simply falls through the cracks, right? The LEA has a lot of things on their plate, and they are worried about the big picture and maybe not these $500 small little amounts to non-public schools that are outside their boundaries. And likewise, the non-public school principals are also very busy and might not have time to keep pushing like, hey, we are entitled to $500 worth of services because it's a small amount of money. But then what happens is the district is out of compliance. And typically, we find instances of this during our desk reviews and on-site reviews. And if there are instances where an LEA has generated an equitable service amount for a non-public school and services are not being provided, that's a compliance issue. So we start to work with the district in a corrective action plan. So pooling across LEAs is a way to kind of help LEAs provide the services they're obligated to provide in a way that's more meaningful and effective for those non-public schools. So when you join a pool, what that means is the non-public school has an LEA where it sits, and most of the time that LEA is already providing a Title I teacher at the non-public school. The teacher's probably not a full-time person. Maybe they spend part of their time in auxiliary services. Maybe they spend only part of the time period. They're a part-time employee at the non-public school. So what pooling allows is for every district that generated funding for that school to put their funding into a pot. And typically the district where the school is located is controlling that pot. And now when they make their rank order list to identify children for service, every district that contributed to the pot can have children on that rank order list. So truly, the children who are most in need academically are receiving the services. If we think about without pooling, because a lot of people across the state are entering into MOUs and having another district provide that service for them. But without pooling, what that looks like is I'm a district that generated $500. I'm going to ask this other district to provide $500 worth of service. That means regardless of where my child falls in the overall academic need of the non-public school, my academically eligible kid gets $500 worth of service. And sometimes that may be higher, that child may be higher achieving than a child whose district didn't generate enough money, and there's a lower achieving kid on the waiting list for another district. So that's a pro. Another positive thing is if you're a district that's accepting Title I funds from another district to provide service, you are required to provide evidence that service occurred. So if you're taking $500, you have to have those fiscal records, time and effort to show $500 worth of service was provided to children from that district only. What we've found since 2019 is that's a high level of detailed documentation that most districts who are just entering into a regular MOU do not have. I would say quite a few of the districts that are doing pooling across LEAs started that because it was part of their corrective action plan from a compliance review, and they have found it has streamlined and made their process easier. And if you are interested in pooling across LEAs, like I said, we've done 2 trainings with regions of the state where districts are starting to look at pooling. So if you think pooling may be a solution for you, you have a non-public school, you know that multiple districts are generating a service amount, reach out to me. We can schedule a call with everyone to walk through what pooling is. I can share some best practice pooling MOUs that districts from around the state have created, and I can share some ideas about how certain regions are using tools like Google Docs to provide all of that Title I documentation and information out to all of the districts that have contributed to the pool.
Thanks, Chantel. Rosemarie had a question. She says, you mentioned using data from 2019. What data were you referring to, and what is it to be used for?
So I don't exactly know, but I can tell you about 2019 data. So typically when Npds opens in the spring, low income counts from the previous fall are what is used. So Npds just opened in March of 21. We would expect non-public schools to be reporting low income data from October count week 2020. Well, the problem is that with all of the waivers that the National School Lunch Program had because of COVID, many schools received free lunch for everyone. And as a result of everyone receiving free lunch, many families did not fill out the National School Lunch Income form, because why do I need to fill out this other form if my kid is already getting free lunch, right? So what we don't want to see happening is, in consultation, you're working with your non-public school and they say all of our kids got free lunch. So they record all of those children in the free column in NPDS. That's not right. You still need to have either the National School Lunch Program documentation or the Ohio Household Income Verification Form documentation, or some other manner of capturing in paper what that family's actual family income is. What we have mentioned in this presentation is that if you don't have FY20, October of 20 data available, the guidance does allow non-public schools or districts to use non-public school data for 2 years. So that means you could go back to October 2019 if they didn't fill out forms this year because of COVID and use those counts. That is a topic that you can discuss during consultation with your non-public school. It's not a blanket rule. So we at the state are not saying everybody use October 2019. What we're saying is use the most current data that you have available. For some of you in some non-public schools, it will be October 20 count week. For some of you, it may be October 2019 count week. So in consultation, you'll work with your non-public schools to provide that information in NPDS. And we've already, Lisa pointed out that whatever is placed into NPDS will directly impact the calculated amounts in CCIP. So make sure that whatever your non-public schools are entering is in fact what you want them to be entering before you mark it public approved.
Edward says he would love to see a template to use on pooling. Is that something he could just email you for, Chantel?
Yep, just send me an email.
And the email is in the chat if you scroll up a little bit. Chantel's email's in there already. Pooling. The question is, when is a typical time to request funds from the other districts for the pool to send in those invoices to get paid back on those pools?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the reasons why we don't have a state template, an MOU template for pooling, is because a lot of the details of the MOU is between the districts that are engaged in pooling. So how often do you want to be invoiced for those services? I know some areas of the state do it quarterly. I know some districts do it at the end of service. It really just depends on the group and what you have decided. What I can tell you is that on July 1st, when you submit your consolidated application, you should know who is providing services at your non-public schools. You should have entered into that contract over the summer. If you are going to be engaging in pooling or entering into an MOU with another district, those contracts happen over the summer. One of the features of NPDS is that it interfaces with CCIP and can pull a report for every district that generated funds for a non-public school. So let's say St. Rose is located in my district, and I've already talked to my county schools around me, and they want to do pooling this year. On July 1st, I can go into NPDS. I can go to the St. Rose entry. I can click the report, and I'll see how much money has been generated for St. Rose by every district that has agreed to this pool. Then I can appropriately staff. I know how many hours that I can pay a teacher to be in that non-public school, and that's going to be set up on the front side. You absolutely should not be providing Title I service to children from any district that doesn't generate Title I funds or that you haven't entered into an MOU with. So again, in this season of compliance, one of the things that I'll sometimes see, I'll go into a non-public school, the Title I teacher will be serving children from 4 different districts. 4 different districts may have generated Title I dollars, But some of those districts don't have a formal written MOU in place. So a gentleman's agreement doesn't work. It doesn't work if you wait until the end of the year and just send that district money because you know that maybe they served your kids. That doesn't work according to the new guidance. So you need to make sure you've agreed on the front side. And part of that agreement is how often do we invoice? And we do want to make sure these invoices are paid within this fiscal year. So you have to still make sure that you're able to close your books in time and that these invoices aren't hanging out there.
Jennifer says, staffing certain positions has been somewhat difficult under this pandemic. Can you cover the allowable ways for which LEAs and/or third-party contracts can provide online instruction to meet supplemental needs online? Staff has been limited in outlying areas.
So one of the provisions of Title I requires that any interventions or services be provided by a properly licensed teacher. So it doesn't say that instruction or assistance has to be face-to-face. So we have in the pandemic seen districts put online programs in place. Some online programs are kind of self-contained, right? The child can just work through whatever online activities is assigned to them by a person. So that person should be a properly licensed teacher who is monitoring what students are being given to do, what is happening with the work that the kids are doing, and supporting any weaknesses in that online structure. Even if it is online, you still have the obligations, or a district still has the obligation to meet parent engagement requirements. So there should be parent engagement activities or opportunities. Again, even if they are done remotely, that's still a requirement of Title I. So I think there has been flexibility. If your LEA has questions about how to do a supplemental online program, definitely reach out to Lisa or I, and we can help make sure that what you're doing does meet compliance.
We have a lull in questions, so we'll give you all a few minutes to think about what you want to ask next. Hi, Regina. I think you've got something funny going on with your
I know.
keyboard.
Regina's got lots of dots.
I don't know what Regina's trying to tell us.
Maybe it's this.
Aha. Rosemarie asks, let's see, as the LEA providing Title I services, should I have knowledge as to what the participating area districts are spending their additional title funds on for the non-public school, or is this not our concern?
So that's a good question. Typically, what I tell the advice I give to districts is if you are entering into an MOU for services, most of the time they're only entering for contracted teacher time, right? So part of that MOU has to be who is providing parent engagement, who's providing the parent engagement activities funded with the set aside. I've seen MOUs written, so it's the service provider, and I've seen MOUs written where it's the home district that generated the funding. So Rosemarie, if I'm Cambridge and I'm looking at, I have an obligation to provide Title I service on behalf of these other districts, I'm definitely going to want to know, are you providing the parent engagement set aside, or am I providing the parent engagement set aside? Now, if they've spent some funds on supplies, so maybe the non-public school has consulted with that other area district, decided they need some Chromebooks or some materials, that's allowable up to 10% of their allocation. You don't necessarily need to know about that because your main concern is going to be the teacher time that you're providing at that non-public school and ensuring that the parent engagement piece is met if the district makes has a greater than $500,000 in Title I. I would also ask about carryover, just because the better communication you have amongst the districts that are contributing to the pool or an MOU, the more likely everyone is meeting compliance. We wouldn't want to, like, a district might automatically assume you're providing all of my Title I service, but maybe at the beginning of the year, they didn't tell you there was carryover. So how can Cambridge provide Title I service plus carryover services if you didn't know there was carryover? So I would definitely err on the side of more questions and more information than less.
Okay, Jennifer asks, can you give a brief idea on how to offer summer programs with all of the federal funds available now? How can these all coordinate? What methods can non-public teachers be contracted to run these programs under Eans? Can they be paid by stipend and or salary set by the ESC? Ooh, lots in that one.
Lots of
good stuff.
So we'll just start with our regular programs. So summer programming is allowable under Title I. We know that if a non-public school is consulting with a district and they're asking for a summer program funded with Title I, we know that it's going to be a targeted assistance model. So not everyone in the non-public school is eligible. There will have to be multi-criterion forms to rank order those children to identify which children would be eligible for that summer program that's being offered. I have had the question in the past couple weeks, does it automatically extend to the children who are currently enrolled in Title I, or is it a different multi-criterion rank order list? I think that's something that you can discuss in consultation. Either works. The requirement just is that it's targeted, and multiple objective criteria have been used to determine the children that will benefit from the services. We could also see summer programming from Title IV-A. Title IV-A is a program that every child in the school would benefit from. Now, with 4A, you would want this to fit under a well-rounded educational opportunity. So you have to frame it in that way. In order for it to be allowable under Title IV, it has to meet the intent and purpose under Title IV, which is well-rounded educational opportunities. Could be safe and healthy schools. In this case, probably not. Could be technology. In this case, probably not, right? So for Title IV-A, it really has to fit into that first umbrella. So in consultation with your non-public schools, you would want to talk about how does this summer programming fit the intent and purpose of well-rounded educational opportunities under Title IV-A, and then it would be eligible for any child in your school, not just those Title I identified kids. I guess then we'll just talk about Eans. So addressing learning loss is a part of Eans and ESSER. So again, always think about what's the intent and purpose of the funding source and what is the need that's driving your program. So if your program that you want to have is really to address learning loss from this previous year, then you could fit that under Eans or ESSER. Now, the other things that Jen is asking is like, how can this be organized and how can it be paid? So we know summer programming is available pretty much under every grant we just said. Everything except 2A. 2A is professional development. We wouldn't expect you to be using 2A for summer programming for kids. Once you have, in consultation, discussed with the non-public school, these are our needs, these are the available funding sources, this is where it really fits the best. Now we need to look at how we're going to make this happen. So we do know that non-public school teachers are an allowable service provider. It is allowable for a district to contract with non-public school teachers outside of their school day to provide those interventions in summer programming. If you're choosing to fund activities in Title II-A and Title IV, that teacher, that non-public school teacher, must be properly licensed. So in Ohio, that means the grade band and the subject area is in alignment with the services that are being provided. With Eans, we've seen that perhaps those properly licensure requirements do not apply to that. So if you have the staffing, then you need to look at who is going to contract with them. We've already said that the non-public school can never enter into a contract for themselves. So we would never expect to see the non-public schools contracting with their teachers for summer programs and then hoping to get reimbursement from any funding source, period. That's not a reimbursable activity under Eans, and we know that reimbursement is not allowed in 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's not an option. So any summer programs have to be put in place with a contract from the public entity that's managing the program and that service provider. So 1, 2, and 4, it's going to be your LEA that's putting those services into place. For Eans, it's more than likely going to be the ESC. Now, we know that Eans is under a very tight timeline. We're essentially building this program as it's flying. So you can imagine that as soon as these funds roll out, ESCs across the state are going to be trying really hard to get all of these services in place, and many of them will be to address learning loss in summer programming. So if you are on this phone call and you're a non-public school, you should be thinking about how you want those services to be provided by your staff. Do you have a third-party contractor that you would like to use? So that once consultation starts with the ESC, it's a little bit easier to move through the steps of actually getting the services in place. The other question up there, I think, was, can it be a stipend? It can be a stipend, but again, the contract has to come from the public entity. So the LEA can provide a stipend to non-public school teachers working outside of their contract for summer programming, or the ESC could do that under Eans.
Charlotte has a great question, Chantel. It says, Ohio permanent non-tax teaching licensed teachers cannot be hired by the LEA used for Title IV and ESSER summer programs, correct? But maybe for Eans.
Right. So Charlotte, I'm kind of like tiptoeing around this because the guidance that we have about the proper licensure not being applicable to Eans came direct from the Office of Non-Public Education Options to our to me, actually, as a response to a question that a district asked in the National Title I conference. So it's not something that the U.S. Department has released in any of their other guidance that I've seen, but it is something that we have. So I would agree with that perhaps that you have written in there. So it's definitely not okay with Title IV, but perhaps with Eans.
And Chantel, this is Morgan. I would just add that we're continually updating the guidance for Eans, our frequently asked questions document. So I would recommend bookmarking that link, and I can drop it in the chat here if you are in any way related to the Eans program. So if you're a non-public school, or you're thinking you just want to stay up to date on that Eans guidance, I would bookmark that hyperlink, and we're continually updating it. So if we get clarification from the U.S. Department, we will be sure to add it to that frequently asked questions document.
Okay, Rosemary had another question. To clarify, as the LEA servicing our non-public, I do not have to provide summer school options to them. They are to use their Eans funds and set up their summer program through the ESC.
I would say no to that. Absolutely not. So we know that summer programming to address learning loss is an option under their Eans funds. We also know that summer school or summer programming is an option under Title I and Title IV-A. So if you are consulting with a non-public school in your boundary who has a large amount of Title I or Title IV that has not been expended, maybe they carried in funds for this year and have a large amount, if they're asking to have a Title I summer program, that's definitely something that the district should engage in consultation with the non-public school about and put that program into place. We know that this summer there are more options for funding sources, but in that consultation with the non-public school, you're going to determine what's the best route to go for districts, right? Title I funds are really intended to be used in the year in which they're awarded. So if you have a non-public school who didn't spend all their money last year and didn't spend all their money this year, your priority should be putting programs in place to draw down those Title I funds before the end of this fiscal year. Eans funds are going to last much, much longer. So again, having that sense of consulting with the non-public school and determining what's the best fit programmatically and what's the best fit in terms of grant and funding source.
Morgan went ahead and put the link in the chat to the Eans FAQ if anyone would like to learn more about that. We have a few more minutes, so if anyone still has questions, feel free to drop those in the chat.
Jen said thank you in the chat from all of the schools in Northwest Ohio. And I know that I speak for Lisa and Morgan and really our whole office when we say thank you for attending these trainings that we're doing. We would much rather provide guidance and assistance on the front side, answer all of your questions to ensure that your district is meeting compliance and that children are really benefiting from effective programming.
Well, we can go ahead and hang on here for a few more minutes, but I'd like to echo Chantel and thanking all of you for being part of this, for coming and listening, and hopefully you got some useful information. But if you don't have any more questions, you can feel free to drop out.
And Rachel, you can probably stop recording now, or Candace.